The letter had promised her a man of poetry and gentle wisdom, but the cowboy who met Abigail Hartwell at the Valentine, Nebraska train station in the spring of 1882 could barely meet her eyes and spoke only in grunts of acknowledgement when she introduced herself with trembling hands. Abigail stood on the wooden platform, her navy traveling dress dusty from 3 days of rail travel from Boston, clutching the carpet bag that contained everything she owned. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, so different from the mild New England springs she had known all her 22 years. She watched the tall man before her, this Isaac Abbott who had written such beautiful letters over the past 6 months, as he shifted his weight from one scuffed boot to the other, his hat pulled low over his face. "Mr. Abbott," she ventured again, her voice smaller than she intended. He nodded once, reaching for her trunk without a word. The silence stretched between them like the endless prairie she could see beyond the town's edge. This was nothing like what she had expected. The letters had been filled with observations about the changing seasons, questions about her thoughts on literature and education, gentle humor about life in a frontier town. The man before her seemed incapable of stringing together a full sentence. The wagon ride to his ranch took nearly an hour, and during that time, Isaac spoke perhaps 10 words total. Abigail tried to fill the silence with questions about the town, about the school where she would teach, about the ranch, but his answers came in single syllables or brief nods. She felt her heart sinking with each passing mile, the reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had left everything familiar, burned her bridges in Boston where opportunities for women schoolteachers were dwindling, all based on letters that now seemed like they must have been written by someone else entirely. The ranch house came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a modest structure, well-maintained but simple, with a barn and corral nearby. A few cattle grazed in a distant pasture. Everything looked neat and orderly, at least that matched what he had described in his letters. Isaac helped her down from the wagon, his touch brief and impersonal. An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "You must be Miss Hartwell. I'm Martha from the neighboring property. Isaac asked me to help you get settled and stay as chaperone until the wedding. Welcome to Nebraska." The kindness in Martha's voice nearly brought tears to Abigail's eyes after the cold silence of the journey. "Thank you. That's very kind." Isaac carried her trunk inside without comment, then disappeared back out to tend to the horses. Martha showed Abigail to a small bedroom that would be hers until the wedding, scheduled for 3 days hence. The room was simple but clean, with a window overlooking the prairie. "Don't mind Isaac," Martha said gently, as if reading Abigail's distress. "He's always been a quiet one. Good man, though, the best you'll find in these parts." After Martha left her to freshen up, Abigail sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out the bundle of letters from her bag. She reread the most recent one, dated just 2 weeks prior. The handwriting was unmistakably the same as the signature Isaac had scrawled on the marriage license papers, but the voice was so different. The letter spoke of anticipating her arrival like waiting for spring after a hard winter, of hoping they would find companionship and partnership in their marriage, of the beauty of the Nebraska sunsets he wanted to share with her. How could the same man who wrote these words barely look at her? Dinner that evening was another exercise in painful silence. Martha tried her best to keep conversation flowing, asking Abigail about her journey and her plans for the school. Abigail learned that the town was desperate for a teacher, the last one having moved back east after only a few months. The school had been closed for nearly a year. "The children are wild as prairie dogs," Martha said with a chuckle. "But they're good kids. Smart, too. They're just eager to learn." Isaac ate steadily, his eyes on his plate. Once or twice, Abigail caught him glancing at her, but he looked away quickly whenever their eyes met. She noticed his hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, but they moved with a certain carefulness when he passed dishes or poured water. There was a gentleness in his movements that his silence belied. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the prairie through her open window, Abigail wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She could not marry a stranger who would not even speak to her. The letters had given her hope for a partnership, perhaps even affection in time. But this awkward silence felt insurmountable. The next morning, she woke to find Isaac had already left the house. Martha explained he was out checking on his cattle and mending fences, work that would keep him occupied most of the day. "Would you like to see the school?" Martha offered. "It's a bit of a walk into town, but the weather's fine." Abigail agreed eagerly, grateful for something to occupy her mind. They walked the 3 miles into Valentine, Martha pointing out various landmarks and sharing gossip about the town's residents. Valentine was larger than Abigail had expected, with a main street featuring several shops, a church, a saloon, and the schoolhouse at the far end. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building, but it had good windows for light and a small room attached at the back where the teacher could stay if needed. Abigail had chosen to accept Isaac's offer of marriage partly because it meant she would not have to live in such cramped quarters, unlike her situation in Boston, where she had shared a boarding house room with 3 other women. "The town council is so pleased you're here," Martha said as they explored the dusty interior. "They've allocated funds for new books and supplies. You'll have everything you need to start." As they walked back toward the ranch, Abigail finally voiced the question that had been plaguing her. "Martha, forgive me for being forward, but was it truly Isaac who wrote those letters? The ones proposing marriage?" Martha's expression grew thoughtful. "What makes you ask that? He barely speaks to me. The letters were so eloquent, so warm, I cannot reconcile the two." Martha sighed, stopping in the middle of the dusty road. "Isaac's had a hard time of it, Miss Hartwell. He lost his parents when he was young, was raised by his uncle who was not a kind man, never learned how to talk to people much, especially women. But I've known him since he came to this area 5 years ago, and I can tell you he's got a good heart. But the letters, oh, those were all him," Martha said firmly. "Isaac can write what he cannot say. Always been that way. Give him time, dear. He's probably scared half to death right now." "Scared of what?" "Of you," Martha said simply. "You're educated, refined, beautiful. You came all this way based on his words, and now he's terrified he's not good enough for you in person." The idea had not occurred to Abigail. She had been so focused on her own disappointment and fear that she had not considered he might be experiencing the same emotions. That evening, Abigail decided to take matters into her own hands. After supper, when Isaac started to retreat to the barn as he had the previous night, she followed him outside. "Mr. Abbott, might I speak with you?" He stopped, his back still to her, shoulders tense. "Yes, madam. Would you walk with me, just a short way? I would like to see the sunset you described in your letters." He turned slowly, surprise evident even with his hat shadowing his face. After a moment, he nodded and gestured toward a small rise beyond the house. They walked in silence, but it felt different somehow, less oppressive. When they reached the top of the rise, the sun was just touching the horizon, the sky ablaze with color. It was indeed beautiful, perhaps the most spectacular sunset Abigail had ever witnessed. "It's lovely," she said softly. Isaac cleared his throat. "I'm glad you think so. His voice was rough, unpracticed. "Mr. Abbott, I want to be honest with you. I came here expecting to meet the man from the letters. I find myself confused by the silence between us." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not respond at all. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry, Miss Hartwell. I'm not good with spoken words, never have been. Put a pen in my hand and somehow it's different. But face to face, especially with someone like you, I just freeze up. Someone like me. You're everything I'm not. Educated, well-spoken, graceful. I'm just a rancher who's better with cattle than people." Abigail felt a surge of sympathy mixed with frustration. The man who wrote those letters is educated too in his own way. He's observant and thoughtful. I came here hoping to meet him, not expecting someone different. You're the same person, Mr. Abbott. Whether you're writing or speaking, you're the same man. He finally looked at her directly, and she was struck by his eyes, a warm brown that held such vulnerability it made her breath catch. I want to be a good husband to you, Miss Hartwell. I know I'm not what you expected, but I'll work hard to make you happy here. Can we start by you calling me Abigail, at least when we're alone? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Only if you call me Isaac. All right then, Isaac. They stood together watching the last of the sunset fade, and while the silence remained, it felt more comfortable, like a beginning rather than a wall between them. The wedding took place 2 days later at the small church in Valentine. Abigail wore her best dress, a deep green silk she had saved for special occasions, and Isaac appeared in a suit that looked slightly too tight around his shoulders, clearly not worn often. The ceremony was simple, attended by Martha and a few townspeople who had come to welcome their new schoolteacher. Reverend Thomas performed the service with warmth and efficiency. When it came time for Isaac to say his vows, Abigail heard his voice shake slightly, but he spoke them clearly enough. She repeated her own vows, feeling the weight of the commitment she was making to this complicated, silent man, who could only show his true self through written words. The wedding supper was held at the town's small restaurant, a gathering of perhaps 20 people who all seemed genuinely pleased to welcome Abigail to their community. She met the mayor, several members of the town council, some of the families whose children would be her students, and various ranchers and business people from the area. Throughout it all, Isaac remained quiet, though Abigail noticed he stayed close to her side, a protective presence even if not a talkative one. When someone spoke to her, he watched carefully, as if monitoring to ensure she was comfortable. When her water glass was empty, he refilled it before she had to ask. Small gestures, but attentive ones. As the evening wound down and they prepared to return to the ranch, Martha pulled Abigail aside. "The back room is all prepared for you, dear. I'll be staying the night again in the spare room to maintain propriety for one more evening. Tomorrow I'll head back to my own place, but you know where to find me if you need anything." Abigail felt a flutter of nervousness. Tomorrow she would truly begin her life as Isaac's wife, in all that entailed. That night, lying alone in what was now her room in her husband's house, Abigail heard the soft sounds of Isaac moving about in the main room, then the house settling into silence. She thought about the day, about the serious way Isaac had looked at her when making his vows, about the care he had shown even in his silence. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to early morning light and the smell of coffee. When she emerged from her room, dressed and ready for the day, she found Isaac at the kitchen table, writing. He looked up when she entered, quickly folding the paper. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he replied, then slid the folded paper across the table toward her before standing and heading for the door. "Got to check on the cattle," he mumbled and was gone. Abigail picked up the paper and unfolded it. The now familiar handwriting covered the page. "Dear Abigail, it read. I know I am not the husband you hoped for when you stepped off that train. I see the disappointment in your eyes when I cannot find the words to speak to you the way I write to you. But I want you to know that everything I wrote in those letters was true. I do see beauty in the prairie sunsets, and I see even more beauty in you. I do want partnership and companionship in our marriage. I am just a fool who does not know how to reach for it properly. Please be patient with me as I learn how to be a husband. I promise to work every day to be worthy of the faith you showed in coming here. Yours, Isaac. She held the letter to her chest, feeling tears prick her eyes. This was the man she had agreed to marry, right here in these words. Somehow, she needed to help him find a way to let this version of himself exist outside of written pages. Martha appeared from the spare room, tying her apron. He left you a letter, did he? How did you know? Because that's what Isaac does when he cannot say what he means. His uncle used to beat him when he spoke out of turn as a boy. Some hurts run deep. The information sent a chill through Abigail. That's horrible. It is. But Isaac survived it and became a good man despite it. Now let's make some breakfast. You've got a school to prepare, and I've got my own home to get back to. Over breakfast, Martha gave Abigail more information about running the household, about where Isaac kept the ranch accounts, about the rhythm of ranch life. After Martha left mid-morning with promises to visit soon, Abigail found herself alone in the house that was now her home. She spent the day organizing her few possessions, exploring the house more thoroughly, and beginning to plan for the school term that would start in 2 weeks. Isaac came in for a quiet lunch, then disappeared again to his work. It was not until evening, when he returned for supper, that they were truly alone together for the first time as husband and wife. Abigail had made a simple meal from the supplies in the kitchen, hoping her cooking would be adequate. She had learned basic skills, but had never been the primary cook in any household before. Isaac ate everything on his plate without comment, and she could not tell if that meant it was acceptable or if he was simply too polite to complain. After the meal, he helped her clear the dishes, their movements awkward as they navigated the small kitchen space. I should show you around the ranch properly tomorrow, he said suddenly, if you'd like. I would like that very much, Abigail replied, pleased he had offered. He nodded, then seemed to struggle with something internally. Finally, your cooking was good, thank you. You're welcome. Another long pause, then, I'll sleep in the barn tonight, until you're ready for things to be different. Abigail had been wondering about this. Isaac, we're married. You don't have to sleep in the barn. I know I don't have to, but I want you to be comfortable. This is all new for you. No need to rush anything. His consideration touched her. Many men would not have given her a choice in the matter. Thank you for understanding. He nodded again and left her to finish cleaning up, disappearing out to the barn as the last light faded from the sky. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Isaac would leave her letters in the morning before heading out to work, letters that were tender and thoughtful, that asked about her day and shared his thoughts. In person, he remained largely silent, though he began to show her around the ranch as promised, introducing her to his horses, walking her through his daily routines, explaining the workings of ranch life with more words than he had managed before, though still halting and brief. Abigail wrote letters back to him, leaving them where he would find them, and in this strange written conversation, they began to know each other. She learned he had dreams of expanding his herd, of maybe one day having horses as well as cattle. He learned about her love of literature, her hopes for her students, her tentative dreams of maybe writing a book someday. The day before school was to start, Abigail went into town to prepare the schoolroom. She was scrubbing down desks when she heard the door open behind her. She turned to find Isaac standing there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the confines of the small building. "Thought you might need help," he said. Together they worked to make the schoolroom ready, Isaac hauling water for cleaning, repairing a broken desk, fixing a window that stuck. As they worked side by side, Abigail found herself telling him about her favorite books, about lessons she wanted to teach. He listened intently and occasionally offered brief comments that showed he was truly hearing her. When they finished, the sun was setting. Isaac helped her into the wagon for the ride home, and as they drove, he surprised her by speaking first. "You're going to be a wonderful teacher. Those kids are lucky." The compliment warmed her more than it probably should have. "Thank you, Isaac. That means a great deal to me. I never had much schooling myself. My uncle thought it was a waste of time, taught myself to read from an old Bible and whatever else I could find. Always wished I had a teacher like you." "You read and write beautifully," Abigail said. "You've clearly educated yourself well." "Books were my friends when I did not have any others," he said quietly. She understood then another piece of him, this man who lived in words on paper because the spoken world had been made unsafe for him as a child. That night, after supper, Abigail made a decision. When Isaac started to head toward the barn, she stopped him. "Isaac, I'd like you to stay in the house tonight, in our room." He froze, his back to her. "You sure? We're married. I want to try to be truly married, if that's what you want too." He turned, and in his eyes she saw hope mixed with fear. "It's what I want, but only if you're certain." "I'm certain." Their wedding night, nearly a week after their wedding, was tentative and awkward, both of them nervous and unsure. But there was gentleness too, and care, and afterward, lying in the darkness next to him, Abigail felt that perhaps they had turned a corner. "Thank you," Isaac whispered in the dark, "for giving me a chance, for being patient." She reached for his hand. "We're in this together now." School began the next day, and Abigail threw herself into teaching with enthusiasm. She had 15 students ranging from age 6 to 14, all eager to learn despite their initial wildness. The youngest was a gap-toothed boy named Tommy who could barely sit still. The oldest was a girl named Sarah, who had responsibilities at home that often kept her from regular attendance. Abigail quickly learned to adapt her Boston teaching methods to frontier realities. Her students had different needs, different backgrounds, different challenges than the children she had taught back east. But they were bright and curious, and she found joy in watching them discover new ideas. Isaac sometimes rode into town to pick her up after school, saving her the long walk. On those rides home, she would tell him about her day, and he would listen, occasionally asking questions that showed how carefully he was paying attention. He never wrote much about his own work in his letters, but she began to piece together an understanding of the challenges he faced from droughts, cattle prices, and the general unpredictability of ranch life. One evening, about a month into their marriage, Abigail was preparing supper when she heard a commotion outside. She looked out to see Isaac struggling with a horse in the corral, a beautiful paint mare that was clearly agitated. Without thinking, Abigail ran outside. "What's wrong?" "She's spooked by something," Isaac said, his voice strained as he tried to calm the animal. "Need to check her for injuries." Abigail watched as he moved around the horse, his movements careful despite the danger of her kicking hooves. He spoke in a low, soothing voice, a constant stream of gentle words that surprised Abigail because she had never heard him talk so much at once, even if it was to an animal. "Easy now, girl. Nobody's going to hurt you. Let me help." "That's it. Easy does it." The horse gradually calmed under his voice and touch. When he finally found the problem, a deep scratch on her flank likely from barbed wire, he had her settled enough to treat it. Abigail helped by holding a lantern as the light faded, watching the care he took with the injured animal. "You're good with her," she observed. "Animals are easier than people," he said, focused on his work. "They don't judge you for being quiet." "I don't judge you for being quiet." He glanced up at her, surprise in his expression. "You should. You married a man who could write pretty words but can barely speak them." "I married a man who is kind and thoughtful and works hard," Abigail corrected. "The words, written or spoken, are just ways of expressing what's already there. You show me who you are every day, Isaac. In how you care for the animals, how you maintain this ranch, how you leave me letters and check if I need anything. Words are not the only form of communication." He stood slowly, the horse now calm beside him. In the fading light, she could see emotion working across his face. Then, hesitantly, he reached for her hand. "You're more than I deserve," he said quietly. "That's not true." "It is, but I'm grateful anyway." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that night their lovemaking was less tentative, more sure. Abigail felt something shifting between them, a growing comfort and trust. The autumn progressed with the establishment of routine. Abigail taught during the day. Isaac worked the ranch, and in the evenings they shared meals and quiet companionship. The letters continued, Isaac's way of sharing his deeper thoughts, and Abigail treasured each one. But the spoken words came more frequently too, especially when they were alone. He began to tell her stories about the ranch, about the land, sharing his knowledge of the prairie and its rhythms. She shared her frustrations and triumphs from the classroom. Slowly, conversation became less of a struggle and more natural. One Saturday in late October, Isaac suggested they ride out to see a part of the ranch Abigail had not yet visited. She was still learning to ride properly, her Boston upbringing not having included much horsemanship, but Isaac was a patient teacher. They rode for over an hour, and Abigail was struck again by the vast beauty of the prairie, so different from anything she had known. They stopped beside a creek lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves golden in the fall sunlight. Isaac helped her dismount, and they sat on the creek bank, letting the horses drink and graze. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Isaac said. "Came here a lot when I first arrived in Nebraska. When things felt too hard, this place gave me peace." "It's beautiful," Abigail agreed. "Thank you for sharing it with me." "I want to share everything with you," he said, then seemed surprised by his own words. He had spoken them aloud rather than saving them for a letter. Abigail turned to him. "Isaac, you're getting better at this, at talking to me. You make it easier. You don't get impatient when I struggle." "Why would I be impatient? I can see you trying, and that matters more than perfect eloquence." He was quiet for a moment then. "I never thought I'd marry. Never thought a woman would want a broken man like me." "You're not broken," Abigail said firmly. "You were hurt and you adapted. That's not the same as being broken. My uncle used to say I was worthless, too stupid to speak properly, only good for hard labor." The pain in his voice made Abigail's heart ache. "Your uncle was wrong, cruel and wrong. I know that in my head, but sometimes I still hear his voice." She reached for his hand. "Then let my voice be louder. You're intelligent, capable, and worthy. Don't let his poison take root." He squeezed her hand, and when he looked at her, his eyes were damp. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "We found each other," she corrected. "And I think we're both lucky." They sat by the creek for a long time, talking more freely than they ever had before. Isaac told her about his childhood, about losing his parents to fever when he was 8, about the 10 years he spent with his uncle before finally running away at 18. He had worked on various ranches, saving every penny, until he had enough to buy his own small piece of land. The last 5 years had been spent building his ranch into something viable. Abigail shared her own story too, about growing up in a Boston boarding house after her father died when she was young. Her mother had worked as a seamstress, determined that Abigail would have an education and opportunities. When her mother passed 2 years ago, Abigail had been left alone, working at a school where the headmaster was increasingly inappropriate in his attention. The opportunity to come west had been an escape as much as an adventure. "We're both starting over in a way," Isaac observed, "both running from something and toward something new." "I suppose we are," Abigail agreed. "I just hope what we're running toward is worth it." "It is," Isaac said with more certainty than she had heard from him before. "At least for me. You're worth it." Riding home that evening, Abigail felt closer to her husband than she had since arriving in Nebraska. The journey had been harder than she expected, the reality more complicated than the letters had suggested. But there was something real growing between them, something that felt like it might become love if they tended it carefully. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow and bitter cold by mid-November. Abigail continued teaching, though some days the weather kept many students home. Isaac spent more time in the barn and around the house, the outdoor work limited by the conditions. The enforced closeness of winter pushed them together more. Evenings were spent by the fire, Abigail grading papers or reading while Isaac maintained equipment or, increasingly, sat with his own book. She had discovered he loved poetry, particularly Whitman, though he had few books. She had brought several volumes with her from Boston, and sharing them had become another point of connection. One snowy evening in December, Isaac was reading aloud to her, something he had started doing hesitantly but had grown more comfortable with. His voice, though still rough from disuse, carried the poetry beautifully. When he finished the poem, he looked up to find her watching him with obvious affection. "What?" he asked, self-conscious. "I was just thinking how much I've come to care for you," she said honestly. He set the book aside carefully. "Truly, truly. I know our start was difficult. I was disappointed and frightened at first, but Isaac, you've shown me every day who you really are. The letters introduced me to your mind, but living with you has shown me your heart, and I find I love both." She had not meant to use the word love, had not even realized she felt it until the word left her mouth. But once spoken, she knew it was true. Isaac's expression transformed, hope and joy and disbelief all at once. "I've loved you since you stepped off that train," he said. "I just thought I'd never be able to make you love me back." "Well, you did. You are. I love you." He crossed to where she sat and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you too, Abigail, more than I knew how to say in any letter." That night marked another shift in their relationship. The tentative partnership became something deeper, more passionate. They were truly married now, not just in law but in heart. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly at the ranch, exchanging modest gifts. Isaac had carved her a beautiful box for her letters and papers, the wood smoothed to silk and inlaid with a delicate pattern. She gave him books, new volumes of poetry and literature, and a journal with fine paper for his own writing. "I thought perhaps you might want to write more than just letters," she explained. "Your observations about the prairie, about life here, they're beautiful. You should preserve them." He ran his hand over the journal's leather cover. "I don't know that anyone would want to read my thoughts." "I would, and perhaps someday others would too." He kissed her then, tender and grateful. The new year of 1883 brought challenges. A harsh winter storm killed several head of cattle, a financial blow that worried Isaac, though he tried to hide it. Abigail saw the stress in the tight set of his shoulders, in the way he pored over the account books in the evening. "How bad is it?" she asked one night, setting aside her pretense of reading. "We'll be fine," he said automatically, then caught himself. They had promised honesty with each other. "It's going to be tight for a while, might need to take on some extra work to make up the loss." "What kind of work?" breaking horses for some of the neighboring ranches. It's dangerous work, but it pays well. Abigail felt a flutter of fear. How dangerous? I know what I'm doing. I'll be careful. She wanted to argue, to tell him to find another way, but she understood the reality of their situation. Promise me you'll be safe. I promise. He started taking the work in late January, riding out to other ranches several days a week. Abigail worried constantly, remembering the power of the spooked horse she had seen him handle months ago. But Isaac was good at his work, patient and skilled with even the most difficult animals. February brought a welcome surprise. Abigail realized she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. The absence of her monthly courses, a persistent queasiness in the mornings, a new tenderness in her body. When she was certain, she decided to tell Isaac in a way he would appreciate. She left him a letter one morning, placed where he would find it when he came in for lunch. She was at school when he would read it, but she imagined his reaction, hoping he would be pleased. That afternoon he was waiting at the schoolhouse when classes ended, something he rarely did during the week. The moment she saw his face, she knew he had read the letter. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "Yes, we're going to have a baby. Probably late August, I think." He pulled her into his arms right there in front of the schoolhouse, not caring who might see. "I'm going to be a father," he said, and she heard tears in his voice. "Are you happy?" "Happy. Abigail, I'm terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can express. A baby, our baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Abigail's morning sickness persisted well into her 4th month, and teaching became increasingly difficult as she tired easily. But the joy of the coming child sustained both of them. Isaac became even more attentive, constantly worried about her well-being, insisting she rest more. By April, Abigail had to acknowledge she could not continue teaching through the end of the school term. Her pregnancy was showing now, and the long days in the classroom were exhausting. The town understood, and they arranged for a temporary replacement teacher for the last months of the school year. Being home full-time gave Abigail the chance to truly learn ranching alongside Isaac. She could not do the heavy work, but she could help in other ways, and she enjoyed the time spent working side by side with her husband. Their conversations flowed more easily now, Isaac's words coming with less struggle. "I've been thinking," he said one day as they repaired a section of fence together, or rather as he repaired it and she handed him tools. "About when the baby comes. I want to be a good father, not like my uncle." "You will be," Abigail assured him. "You're already so caring. Look at how gentle you are with the animals, how patient you've been with me. You'll be wonderful with our child." "I worry I won't know what to say, how to talk to a child. Children don't need perfect words. They need presence and love and patience. You have all of those." He set down his hammer and looked at her, his hand moving to rest gently on her swelling belly. "I love you both so much already. We love you too." Summer arrived, hot and dry. Abigail moved slowly in the heat, her belly large now, the baby active inside her. Isaac watched her constantly, worry evident in his expression whenever she showed the slightest discomfort. In late August, on a sweltering afternoon, Abigail's labor began. Isaac rode immediately for Martha and the town doctor, his fear barely contained. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Isaac paced outside the bedroom, listening to Abigail's cries, feeling helpless and terrified. Finally, as dawn broke on the 2nd day, he heard a new sound, the wail of an infant. Martha emerged from the bedroom, tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy boy, and Abigail is exhausted but fine." Isaac rushed past her into the room. Abigail lay pale and sweaty against the pillows, but she was smiling, holding a small bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, reverently. "Meet your son," Abigail said softly. Isaac looked down at the tiny red face, the small fists waving, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Would you like to hold him?" Carefully, terrified of his own strength, Isaac took the baby into his arms. The infant was so small, so fragile. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I'm your papa. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe and loved." Abigail watched them, tears streaming down her face. "I was thinking we might name him James, after my father." "James Abbott," Isaac said, testing the name. "I like it. James Isaac Abbott." They spent the first weeks of parenthood in exhausted wonder. James was a hungry baby, demanding frequent feedings that left Abigail drained. Isaac helped however he could, changing soiled cloths, walking the floor with the baby when he fussed, handling ranch work while trying to be present for his new family. One night, when James was about 3 weeks old, Abigail woke to find Isaac's side of the bed empty. She heard soft sounds from the main room and went to investigate. She found Isaac sitting in the rocking chair by the dying fire, James asleep against his chest, and Isaac was talking. "Your mama is the strongest person I've ever known," he was saying softly to the sleeping baby. "She came all the way from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, just because of some letters. And when she met me and realized I couldn't hardly talk to her, she stayed anyway. She gave me a chance. She gave me you. I want you to grow up knowing how to use your words, son. I don't want you to be silent like me. But I also want you to know that there's more than one way to show love. Sometimes it's in words, but sometimes it's in actions, in being present, in working hard to provide and protect. I'm going to teach you all of that." Abigail's heart swelled listening to him. She stepped into the room and Isaac looked up, slightly embarrassed to be caught in his monologue. "Don't stop," she said softly. "It's beautiful." "Just talking to my son," Isaac said, "I heard. You're going to be an amazing father." As summer turned to fall, they settled into the rhythms of life with an infant. Abigail planned to return to teaching after the new year when James would be older and could be watched by Martha during school hours. For now, she was content to be home, learning motherhood, enjoying this time with her small family. Isaac had begun writing in the journal she had given him, filling pages with observations about ranch life, about fatherhood, about his love for his wife and son. Sometimes he read passages aloud to Abigail in the evenings, and she was struck again by the beauty of his written voice. "You should consider publishing some of these," she suggested one evening. "Truly, Isaac, people would want to read about frontier life, about your perspective." "Maybe someday," he said, not ready to think of his private thoughts as something for public consumption. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. His first smile, his first laugh, his first tooth. Every milestone was celebrated, every change noted with wonder. Abigail returned to teaching in January of 1884, and Martha proved to be a loving and capable caretaker for James during school hours. The ranch continued to provide, and Isaac's careful management kept them comfortable if not wealthy. Life settled into a good pattern, and Abigail often thought about how different her life had become from what she had imagined in Boston. This was harder in many ways, the work more demanding, the conditions more challenging. But it was also richer, fuller, more meaningful. One spring evening, when James was about 18 months old and toddling around the house getting into everything, Isaac left Abigail another letter. She had thought this tradition might fade as he became more comfortable speaking, but he still wrote to her regularly. The letter's a gift she treasured. This one was different, though. It was longer, more formal in some ways. "My dearest Abigail," it read. "When you stepped off that train nearly 3 years ago, I was certain you would take one look at me and get right back on. I had poured my heart into those letters, shown you the best parts of myself, and I knew I could never live up to them in person. But you stayed. You gave me a chance to learn how to be a husband, how to show you in person what I could so easily write on paper. You've taught me that words are just one form of communication, that love shows itself in 1,000 different ways. You've given me a son, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. I'm not the same man who met you at that station. You've changed me, healed parts of me I thought were broken beyond repair. I talk more now because you've made it safe to talk. I laugh more because you've shown me joy. I love more because you taught me how. Thank you for accepting my proposal all those years ago. Thank you for staying when you could have left. Thank you for building this life with me. All my love, always, Isaac." Abigail read the letter through tears, then went to find her husband. He was outside, teaching James the names of the horses, the toddler's hand held safely in his father's larger one. She watched them for a moment, this beautiful sight of her two loves together, then called out, "Isaac." He turned, saw her face, and immediately looked concerned. "What's wrong?" She crossed to him and kissed him soundly. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I love you." He smiled, that smile that still came rarely enough to be precious when it appeared. "I love you too." "You know," she said, taking his free hand while he still held James with the other, "I used to think those letters were the real you and the silent man at the station was some kind of pretender. But I understand now they're both you. The letters are your heart, but the man you are every day working this ranch, caring for our son, loving me even when words fail you, that's your soul. And I love all of it. You're the one who made it possible," he said. "Before you, I was just surviving. Now I'm living." They stood together in the fading light, their son between them, and Abigail thought about the journey that had brought her here. The advertisement in the Boston paper, the decision to respond, the months of letter writing, the leap of faith to travel across the country to marry a stranger. Every scary, uncertain step had led to this moment, to this family, to this love. 2 years later, in the summer of 1886, Abigail gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. James was a curious and helpful big brother, and Isaac proved himself capable of handling both children with the same gentle patience he showed the horses. The ranch prospered as cattle prices improved, and Isaac's reputation as a horse trainer brought in additional income. They were able to expand their land holdings, and even hired a young man to help with the increasing work. Abigail continued teaching, finding deep satisfaction in educating the children of Valentine. She had become a respected member of the community, known for her dedication and the genuine care she showed her students. Some of her former pupils were now young adults themselves, and she took pride in seeing them make their way in the world. Isaac had finally agreed to let her submit some of his journal writings to a magazine back east that published frontier stories and essays. To his surprise and embarrassment, they were accepted and published, bringing in a small amount of money, but more importantly bringing validation that his perspective had value. He continued to write, finding in it both solace and expression. Their marriage had deepened over the years into something both comfortable and passionate. They knew each other's rhythms and needs, could communicate with a glance across a room. Isaac still wrote her letters, though less frequently now that his spoken words came more easily. But the letters remained special, saved in the carved box he had made, treasured records of their love. One evening in the fall of 1888, with James now 5 and Rose 2, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. It had become a tradition, this evening gathering, a time to be together before the children's bedtime. "Tell us the story of how you and Mama met," James requested, as he often did. Isaac looked at Abigail and smiled. "Well, son, it started with letters. Your mama lived far away in Boston, and I was here in Nebraska. I wrote to her about my life, about this ranch, about the sunsets we're watching right now. And she wrote back, telling me about herself, about her dreams of being a teacher. And then Mama came on the train." James said, knowing the story well but loving the repetition. "That's right. She came all the way here to marry me, even though we'd never met in person." "Were you scared, Mama?" James asked. "I was terrified," Abigail admitted. "I didn't know if I had made a terrible mistake." "But you stayed," Isaac said, looking at her with all the love and gratitude he felt. "I stayed," she confirmed. "Because even though your father was different than I expected, I could see he was a good man, and I wanted to give us a chance." "I'm glad you stayed," Rose piped up, her small voice serious. "Otherwise we wouldn't be here." "That's very true," Abigail said, pulling her daughter close. "And I'm glad too, so very glad." As the sun set in its magnificent display of color, Isaac reached over and took Abigail's hand. No words were needed in that moment. Everything they felt was communicated in the gentle pressure, the warmth of skin on skin, the choice to sit together watching the beauty of the world they had built. The years continued their steady march. James started school with his mother as his teacher, a situation that delighted them both even when he complained that she was harder on him than the other students. Rose grew from a toddler to a little girl with her father's thoughtful nature and her mother's quick mind. In 1890, Isaac made a decision that surprised Abigail. He announced he wanted to run for the town council. She had watched him grow more comfortable in the community over the years, seen him slowly become more willing to speak up at town meetings and church gatherings. But seeking elected office seemed like a huge step for a man who had once barely been able to string sentences together. "Are you sure?" she asked when he told her his plans. "I'm sure. I've been thinking about it for a while. There are things I want to help change, improvements the town needs. And I figure it's time I stopped hiding from people." "You haven't been hiding. Maybe not hiding exactly, but not fully participating either. You've shown me I can do more than I thought. Time to prove it to myself." He won the election by a comfortable margin, known in the community as a fair and honest man. Serving on the council pushed him even further out of his comfort zone, requiring him to speak publicly, to debate issues, to advocate for his positions. It was hard for him, but he persisted, and Abigail watched with pride as he became increasingly confident in his public voice. At home, he remained the same man, still more comfortable with written words than spoken ones when it came to deep emotions, still leaving her occasional letters that made her heart swell. But he had proven to himself and the world that he was capable of more than he had believed possible. In 1892, their third child was born, another son they named William. The children were each different, each special in their own ways. James was studious and serious, already talking about becoming a teacher like his mother. Rose was spirited and adventurous, drawn to the outdoors and the animals. William was still too young to show much personality, but he was a content baby who seemed to fit perfectly into their growing family. The ranch continued to thrive, and Isaac hired additional help to manage the increasing demands. They were not wealthy by any standard, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and save for the future. Abigail had published a few articles herself about frontier education, building on Isaac's example of sharing their experiences with a wider audience. One day in the spring of 1894, a letter arrived addressed to Isaac from a publishing house in New York. Abigail watched as he read it, his expression moving from confusion to disbelief to wonder. "They want to publish a collection of my writings," he said, looking up at her with stunned eyes. "A full book. They say my perspective on frontier life is unique and valuable." "That's wonderful," Abigail exclaimed. "I told you people would want to read your words. I don't know. A book seems so permanent, so public." "Isaac, you've been sharing your words for years now through magazine publications. This is just a bigger platform, and think of what it could mean for other people who feel like you used to feel, who think they're broken or worthless. Your story shows that's not true." He considered this, turning the letter over in his hands. "You think I should do it? I think you should do what feels right to you. But yes, I think you should. I think you have important things to say and people should hear them." He agreed, and over the next year he worked on compiling and editing his journals and published pieces into a coherent manuscript. The book was published in the fall of 1895 under the title Prairie Silences, A Cowboy's Voice. It was not a bestseller, but it sold respectably and received positive reviews. More importantly, it brought Isaac letters from readers who related to his experiences, who found hope in his journey from silence to voice. By 1896, their family had settled into a comfortable rhythm. James was 13, excelling in school and helping substantially with ranch work. Rose was 9, equally comfortable in the classroom and on horseback. William was 4, a cheerful child who adored his older siblings. Isaac and Abigail had been married 14 years, and their love had only deepened with time and experience. One evening, Abigail found another letter from Isaac, placed on her pillow as had been his custom years ago. She opened it curiously, wondering what had prompted this return to their old form of communication. "My love," it read. "Today I was riding the far pasture, and I passed the creek where we sat and really talked for the first time all those years ago. I remember how broken I felt back then, how certain I was that I could never be the husband you deserved. I remember the patience you showed, the faith you had that I could become more than I believed possible. Sitting there today, I thought about everything that's happened since. 3 children. A successful ranch, my work on the council, the book, all of it traces back to that day, to your refusal to accept that silence was all I could offer. You've given me so much, taught me so much, but most of all you've loved me, not despite my struggles but through them. You saw the man I could be and helped me become him. I am so grateful for every day we have together. I love you more than any words, written or spoken, could ever express. Yours always, Isaac." Abigail held the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. After all these years, he could still move her so deeply with his words. She found him in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal, and simply walked into his arms. "I love you," she said. "Then, now, and always." He held her close, this woman who had transformed his life, and felt the same overwhelming gratitude he had experienced that day she agreed to stay, to try, to build a life with him. The years continued their passage, bringing the challenges and joys that make up a life. James went east for college, studying to become a teacher as he had always planned. Rose surprised no one by announcing her intention to run the ranch someday, showing a natural aptitude for the work and a genuine love for the land. William was still finding his path, but he showed promise in many directions. Isaac continued his work on the town council and eventually served a term as mayor. Abigail taught for another decade before retiring from the classroom, though she continued to tutor students who needed extra help. Their ranch remained successful, now one of the larger operations in the area. In 1900, as the century turned, Isaac and Abigail stood together at the same spot by the creek where they had shared so many important moments. Their children were grown or growing, their life together rich with memory and meaning. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Answering that advertisement, coming all the way out here to marry a stranger?" Abigail looked at him, this man she had come to know so completely, and shook her head. "Not for a single moment. You were a stranger then, but you became my home. This life we built, it's better than anything I could have imagined sitting in that Boston boarding house." "I was so scared when you stepped off that train," he admitted. "Scared you would see me and realize the letters were lies." "They weren't lies. They were just a different part of you. It took me time to understand that, but the man who wrote those beautiful letters and the man who could barely speak to me, they were both you. Both real. Both valuable." "You made me whole," he said simply. "We made each other whole," she corrected. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in those same brilliant colors that had awed Abigail on her first evening at the ranch. So much had changed since then, but the beauty of the land remained constant, and the love between them had only grown stronger. James eventually returned to Valentine with his new wife, taking over teaching duties at the school. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son, and together they ran the Abbott Ranch as Isaac and Abigail gradually stepped back from the daily operations. William surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer and moving to Lincoln, though he visited often. Isaac and Abigail became grandparents multiple times over, delighting in the next generation. They remained active in the community, respected elders whose opinion was sought on important matters. Isaac published a second book of essays about life and family, and Abigail compiled a guide for frontier teachers that was used in schools across the West. As they moved into their 60s, they slowed down physically, but remained close companions. They spent their days in quiet activities, reading together, taking gentle walks, visiting with children and grandchildren. The letters had stopped years ago, no longer needed, as Isaac had long since found his voice in their relationship. But he still surprised her sometimes with a written note, a reminder of how they had first come to know each other. One warm summer evening in 1910, they sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. They had done this thousands of times over the 28 years of their marriage, and it never grew old. Isaac reached over and took Abigail's hand, his grip not as strong as it once was but still sure. "I have no regrets," he said suddenly. "About what? About any of it. Every choice I made that led me here to you, to this life. I wouldn't change a thing." "Neither would I," Abigail agreed. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts maybe, they taught us what we were capable of." "You taught me what I was capable of," he corrected. "I would have stayed silent forever if not for you. And I would have stayed safe and small in Boston if not for you. We needed each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Inside, they could hear Rose and her husband visiting, their grandchildren's laughter echoing through the house. The ranch that Isaac had built with such effort was thriving under the next generation's care. The school where Abigail had taught so many children was now run by their son. Their legacy was secure, but more than that, it was meaningful. "You remember what I wrote in that first letter?" Isaac asked. "The one proposing marriage." "Every word," Abigail said. "You wrote about wanting a partner for life, someone to share the beauty and the hardship. You wrote about the prairie and its endless possibilities. You wrote about hoping to find someone who would see you truly. And you did. You saw me truly, even when I couldn't show you who I really was at first. We saw each other truly," Abigail said. "That's the gift we gave each other. The freedom to be fully ourselves." As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar routines of their shared life, Abigail thought about the scared young woman who had stepped off the train so many years ago. That woman had been brave but terrified, hopeful but uncertain. She had found strength she did not know she had, built a life she could not have imagined, loved more deeply than she had thought possible. And Isaac, the silent cowboy who had barely been able to speak to her that first day, had become a man of words both written and spoken. He had learned to share his thoughts not just on paper, but in conversation, in public speaking, in the everyday expressions of love and care that made up a marriage. But it was still the letters she treasured most, those windows into his deepest self that he had first shared with her across the miles between Boston and Nebraska. Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes of aging. They lost friends to time and illness. Their own bodies slowed and ached. But through it all, they had each other, the partnership they had built sustained through decades of choice and commitment. In the spring of 1915, Isaac fell ill with pneumonia. Abigail nursed him carefully, terrified of losing him after 33 years together. For days he fought the fever and cough, and during that time, delirious and weak, he talked more than he had in months, his words tumbling out without the filter he had spent a lifetime learning to navigate. He told her he loved her over and over. He thanked her for staying when she could have left. He marveled at their children and grandchildren. He spoke of regrets so small they barely mattered and joys so large they filled his whole heart. And Abigail listened to it all, holding his hand, wiping his forehead, loving him through the crisis. He recovered, though the illness left him weaker. As he regained his strength through the summer, they spent long hours sitting together, appreciating the simple fact of being alive together. One afternoon, Abigail found Isaac at his desk writing. She had not seen him write in his journal for months. "What are you working on?" she asked. "A letter to you," he said, "in case there comes a time when I cannot tell you myself what you mean to me." "Isaac, you don't need to do that." "I want to. Please let me." She left him to his writing, and that evening he gave her the letter. She read it through tears, his words as beautiful and moving as ever. He had written about their life together, about the gift she had given him in loving him despite his broken communication, about how she had healed wounds he thought were permanent. He wrote about his gratitude for their children, for the life they had built, for every sunset they had watched together. "I will never read this without crying," she told him. "It's too beautiful. Good tears, I hope. The best kind." They lived several more good years together, watching their family grow and thrive. More grandchildren arrived, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch continued under Rose's capable management. James's school was known as one of the best in the region. William's law practice flourished. Everything they had worked to build was bearing fruit beyond what they had imagined. In the winter of 1920, as they approached 40 years of marriage, they celebrated quietly at home, surrounded by family. Isaac was 75 now, Abigail 60. Their bodies were worn, but their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other was as strong as ever. 40 years, Isaac marveled during the celebration. Sometimes it feels like 40 days. It passed so fast. But when I think of everything we've done, everyone we've loved, it feels like several lifetimes. "The best lifetime I could have asked for," Abigail said. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone again, Isaac surprised her with one more letter. She had thought perhaps that tradition had finally ended, but here was one more, the handwriting shakier now but still recognizably his. "My dearest Abigail," it read. 40 years ago, I met you at that train station and could barely speak. Today, surrounded by the family we created, the life we built, I find myself again without adequate words. But this time it is not from fear or brokenness, but from overwhelming gratitude and love. You took a chance on a cowboy who could write pretty letters but couldn't speak them. You stayed when you could have left. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You gave me children and a purpose and a reason to find my voice. Everything good in my life traces back to you, to your courage and patience and love. Thank you for 40 years of partnership. Thank you for seeing who I could be and helping me become that man. Thank you for loving me. I love you more than words, written or spoken, will ever capture. Yours always and forever, Isaac. Abigail held the letter close, adding it to the box that now held hundreds of his letters, a chronicle of their love written in his hand. She thought about the journey they had traveled together, from strangers connected only by words on paper to partners who knew each other more deeply than they knew themselves. They lived several more years together, their love a quiet, steady presence that anchored their family and community. When Isaac finally passed in his sleep in 1924 at the age of 79, Abigail was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it through thousands of days and nights. She mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had had a full life together, rich with meaning and love. Their children and grandchildren surrounded her with support, and she found comfort in the legacy they had built together. In her remaining years, Abigail often reread Isaac's letters, finding in them the voice of the man she had loved. She shared them with her grandchildren, wanting them to understand the complicated, beautiful love story that had created their family. The letters showed them a side of their grandfather many had never fully known, the eloquent, thoughtful man who lived beneath the quiet exterior. When Abigail passed peacefully in 1928, at the age of 68, she was buried beside Isaac in the Valentine Cemetery. Their grave marker was simple, bearing their names and dates, and a line from one of Isaac's published essays. In silence and in voice, in written words and lived actions, we find the many ways to love. Their children found, among Abigail's possessions, all of Isaac's letters carefully preserved in the carved box he had made for her. They also found letters she had written back to him, saved and treasured in his desk. The correspondence told the story of their relationship from tentative beginning to deep partnership, a record of two people learning to love across the barriers of hurt and fear. Rose ensured the ranch continued in the family, passing it eventually to her own children. James's legacy lived on in the generations of students he taught and in the teachers he trained. William's work in law helped shape Nebraska's development in the early 20th century. All of them carried forward the lessons their parents had taught about perseverance, love, and the courage to be vulnerable. The small house where Isaac and Abigail had built their life remained in the family for generations, eventually becoming a kind of family museum, preserved with many of their original possessions. Visitors could see the box Isaac had carved, read some of the letters, and understand the love story that had started with words on paper and grown into something beautiful and enduring. In Valentine, the school and town buildings that Isaac had helped establish continued to serve the community. The church where they had married still stood. The prairie they had loved stretched endlessly, unchanged by human drama, constant in its austere beauty. The story of the schoolteacher and the cowboy became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about taking chances and having faith, about the different ways people communicate and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, about how love can grow in unexpected soil if tended with patience and care. Most of all, it was a story about two people who found each other across distance and difference, who built a life together despite uncertainty and challenge, who loved each other truly and completely. It was a story of the American West, of frontier life and pioneer spirit. But at its heart, it was simply a love story, as timeless as the prairie sunset and as enduring as the words Isaac had written in his very first letter. I am looking for a partner to share this life with all its beauty and hardship. Perhaps we could find that partnership together. And they had. Against all odds and expectations, the Boston schoolteacher and the silent Nebraska cowboy had found exactly what they were looking for in each other. Their love had weathered every storm, grown stronger through every challenge, and created a legacy that would outlast them both. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for when Abigail stepped off that train in 1882, but it was exactly what both of them needed. In finding each other, they had found themselves, and in building a life together, they had created something that would echo through generations. The letters were preserved, the love was remembered, and the story lived on, a testament to the power of taking chances and the beauty of love that grows slowly, steadily, rooted deep in commitment and watered with patience until it becomes something that cannot be shaken, that endures beyond even death itself.